gentle listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, the fortnightly podcast that brings you dark tales, both old and new, performed by voice artist Kristin Holland. Yet again, we find ourselves in the horrid clutches of another All Hallows Eve. All you things out there that go bump in the night, welcome back. I think you'll love what we've done with the place in 2020. Even the grimmest of imaginations would have been hard-pressed to prognosticate the unpleasant predicaments this present period has provided its perplexed population. Most perturbing. Let's try and lighten the mood for those delicate mortals amongst our listenership who could use some cheering up. First of all, we have some new acolytes to welcome. What's that, you ask? What are these acolytes you keep mentioning? Why, they are the lovely listeners who have chosen to support our humble production through a Patreon subscription. In return for this act of largesse, they receive exclusive episodes. Every third episode, as a matter of fact, is just for our Patreon subscribers. They also receive funky digital membership cards and screensavers and Nocturnal Transmissions' eternal affection and gratitude. Now, because these wonderful individuals have chosen to join at acolyte level, other levels are available, they receive a personalized welcome on the show, which, as it just so happens, is occurring at this very moment. Welcome, Nicholas Huber. Welcome, Aaron Vleck. Welcome, Evil Kitty. Thank you for lending your precious breath that we might keep the dark flame burning. So, did you notice anything different when our little square picture popped up in your podcast feed? The more keen-eyed amongst you will have noticed that our artwork has been rejigged, as it were. It's a little darker, a little unfriendlier, a little more, well, us. The reason for this makeover, if you will, is the current project our creative minions are slaving over in the workshop. In response to popular demand, we are in the process of developing a range of Nocturnal Transmissions merchandise for your enjoyment. We intend to have a range of fun goodies and wearables prepared for you before the end of the year, so stay tuned. We'll keep you posted. Now, I was thinking, we haven't had an installment of Nocturnal Transmissions Recommends for a while now. Perhaps, just to mix things up a little on this All Hallows Eve, we could put it at the start of the show instead of at the tail end, for want of a better term. Yes, let's do it. Gentle listener, gird your loins. It's time for another round of Nocturnal Transmissions Recommends. It's Halloween. You hear a knock at the door. Fearing for your very life, you clutch a reassuring bowl of candy and reach tentatively towards the door handle. What dread being will be darkening your doorstep on this occasion? For the better part of a century, there was, and continues to be, every chance that you will find yourself confronted by a diminutive, debonair Dracula, a little lurching Frankensteins Monster, a wild and woolly wolf boy, perhaps even a fishy wee creature from the Black Lagoon. These icons of popular culture have haunted cinema palaces, comic books, cereal boxes, toy boxes, televisions, and lunch boxes for probably as long as you can remember, gentle listener. But from whence do they come? They are as familiar as Santa Claus, Mickey Mouse, Chewbacca, Heavens, even Bill Murray, recognized instantly by people all over the globe. So, who created these iconic images that continue to fascinate with such tenacity? Well, we have to go all the way back to 1931 to answer that question, gentle listener, and visit a little American film company called, I think you know what I'm going to say, Universal Pictures. Founder of Universal Pictures, Carl Laemmle, handed over the reins to his son, Carl Laemmle Jr., in 1931, and the young Laemmle decided that his first project should be a horror film. And what better source material could there be than Bram Stoker's immortal classic, Dracula? Well, he actually decided to do an adaptation of the stage play production, Dracula, that was enjoying great success at the time, but that was itself a loose adaptation of Bram Stoker's original story, simplified and fiddled with to better suit a 1920s theatrical incarnation. Now, this wasn't technically Universal's first foray into horror film. They had previously released The Phantom of the Opera in 1925, starring Lon Chaney, but Dracula was the first American talkie, that is to say, not silent, monster film, and with its enormous success at the time and enormous influence on what was to follow, it is considered the first in the great American tradition of monster movies. And so it began. Bela Lugosi, who was plucked from the stage production to play the role of Dracula in Universal's film, presented a cultured, masculine, dare we say, sexy version of the Count, resplendent in white bow tie and matching waistcoat, flowing high-collared cape, immaculate slicked-back hair, and mesmerizing arched eyebrows. No fangs for this early incarnation, interestingly enough, just piercing stares. And discreet bites on the neck of his victims, whose wounds were never shown to camera. This image of Count Dracula bears little resemblance to the description provided in Bram Stoker's original novel, but due to the great popularity of the original Universal Pictures film, this is the image that stuck and fills online Halloween costume shop catalogs to this very day. So successful was this first little venture into horror movie making by Laemmle Jr. that he decided to go straight back to the well and drag up another fiend from classic horror literature for the silver screen treatment. This time, Mary Shelley provided the required monster, Frankenstein. Or, more specifically, Dr. Frankenstein's Monster. Boy, oh boy, gentle listener, if you think they cooked up an icon first time around, you ain't seen nothing yet. Makeup artist Jack Pierce spent months experimenting previous to working in collaboration with actor Boris Karloff to perfect the look of the monster. In the end, they came up with a creature that looked like how a scientist, more concerned with functionality than aesthetics, would construct a hybrid artificial man, than perhaps what a trained doctor, restrained by their Hippocratic oath, might produce. The rectangular, flat-topped head with its protruding brow, heavy eyelids, neck-mounted electrodes, and caved-in cheeks, achieved by Boris Karloff removing his dental appliance. Not to mention the accompanying disconcerting lean, awkward walk, and equally awkward suit tailoring, made for an image that remains one of the most recognizable in popular culture today. Again, this interpretation bore no resemblance in either appearance or demeanor to the original character from the book. It is pure movie reimagining, but reimagining that, not unlike Dracula, eclipsed its source material. Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein kicked off the pantheon of classic movie monsters. The Mummy followed, then The Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Daughter of Dracula. Isn't that always the way when relatives start dropping by? The Wolfman, the creature from the Black Lagoon, all skulked out of the black and white shadows to capture the imaginations of young filmgoers and budding filmmakers to follow. Some of these films hold up remarkably well, even for a jaded, unsentimental contemporary audience. Others, not so much. But the legacy of this great experiment in mainstream cinema is a gift we horror hounds all continue to enjoy. So, this Halloween, let's celebrate some of our most iconic Universal classic monsters through that time-honored Halloween tradition of horror movie watching, of course, gentle listener. Please allow us to recommend 4 films that we think will not only allow us to revisit some of our favorite fiends, but also to celebrate them as they are reinterpreted through the years. Let's start with The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Released in 1954, this rather beautifully shot black and white feature, which was screened in 3D at the time, believe it or not, appears quite late in the run of Universal classic monster films. A scientific expedition on the Amazon River discovers a previously unknown to science gill man, half fish, in a remote watering hole known as the Black Lagoon. They manage to capture the mysterious creature, but it breaks free only to return later with amorous intentions towards the fiancée of one of the expeditioners. Now, if this lurid description whets your appetite, please do watch the original. But the film we are recommending you honor our eponymous creature by watching is Guillermo del Toro's Oscar-winning The Shape of Water. His love letter to one of the films that inspired him in his youth. A love letter that takes the simple premise of the original and weaves it into something beautiful, haunting, and new. There's a reason this incarnation of the Gill Man received 4 Oscars, gentle listener. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Achievement in Music, Best Achievement in Production Design. I hasten to add it swept the Golden Globes as well. And that reason is that it is a simply gorgeous cinematic experience, sprinkled with just a delicate touch of horror and heaped spoonfuls of fantasy. Oh, and it has Michael Shannon in it, so what's not to like? Next, we look to Universal's The Wolfman, another Jack Pierce makeup artist extraordinaire creation. You can probably guess the general outline of this one. hapless chap gets bitten by a werewolf and inherits the curse, transforming into a hairy beast when under the influence of a full moon. Again, you may wish to revisit the original 1941 production, but what we're recommending you treat yourself to this Halloween, as part of our classic monster celebration, is the greatest werewolf film of all, John Landis's An American Werewolf in London. Two American college students on a walking tour of England have an unfortunate encounter with a large wolf on the moors. One is mauled to death, and the other is not so lucky. Genuinely frightening and genuinely hilarious results ensue. Now, any horror fan worth their salt will know that special effects maestro Rick Baker's unforgettable transformation scene in An American Werewolf in London is the most famous transformation scene in the history of genre cinema. As a matter of fact, it won the first ever Oscar for Best Makeup. This was back in 1981. And it still holds up today, as does the whole film for that matter. It is one of those wonderful mixings of horror and humor, where the two are in perfect harmony. I put it to you, gentle listener, that this is one of the most entertaining motion pictures, genre or otherwise, ever created. It is frightening, it is funny, it is brilliant, it's a joy. Perfect Halloween fare. All right, this is fun. Let's talk about another one. How about Dracula? Now, we really are spoilt for choice when it comes to films about this particular antagonist. I'm going to recommend to you, for your Halloween viewing pleasure this year, one of our humble narrator's very favorite vampire offerings. World-famous director Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, the Vampire. His 1979 homage to Franz Murnau's original 1922 silent film, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. This remake sees infamous German actor Klaus Kinski slip into the role of the Count, originally portrayed masterfully by Max Schreck back in the day. We've touched on this particular film in Nocturnal Transmissions Recommends before, gentle listener, particularly in reference to the hair-raising rumors surrounding Mr. Schreck's vampire. So I shan't retread old ground now. Let's focus on Werner Herzog's film. His vampire, just like Murnau's original hideous creation, appears as a gaunt, menacing figure with cruelly sharp, arachnid fang front teeth and impossibly long-fingered albino spider hands. I would say the most arresting image of a vampire ever imagined. Apologies, Mr. Lugosi. And the performance Mr. Kinski gives in this guise is about as compelling and chilling a version of the Good Count as we have ever seen. Isabelle Adjani is haunted, heroic, and mesmerizingly beautiful as Lucy Harker. Klaus's Dracula is, well, a perfectly realized nightmare. Wildly fanciful, yet utterly believable. Predatory and tragic. He simply is the vampire. As is so often the case, this film takes quite a few liberties with Bram Stoker's original tale, but its retelling is much more aligned with the journey of his Dracula than Universal's 1931 interpretation. Anyway, all that aside, if you, like us here at Nocturnal Transmissions, have a soft spot for vampire films, this is absolutely required viewing. Oh, ye gods, I've been rambling on for some time now, have I not, gentle listener? Let's wrap things up. Our final classic monster film recommendation is Frankenstein. And yes, gentle listener, this time I mean the original 1931 Universal black and white motion picture. For this particular monster, one simply cannot go past the James Whale-directed original, and more specifically, Boris Karloff's absolutely inspired performance as Frankenstein's Monster. This nearly 90-year-old feat of acting is the touchstone for any thespian who flatters themselves that they might have the chops to inhabit the soul of a foredoomed, confounded, maligned, menacing movie monster. His physical performance, his vocal performance, the pathos, the tragedy will take your breath away. This is the monster that seared its image like a hot brand onto the minds of 1930s moviegoers and stayed imprinted in our collective conscious for decades and decades to follow. If you have an interest in acting, horror, reanimated body parts, or just big square heads, this is a must-see for you. Experience it. Or, if you've already been anointed, re-experience it. We strongly recommend you do. So, there you have it, gentle listener. Some Halloween viewing suggestions for you to consider. The Shape of Water, An American Werewolf in London, Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, and the original Universal's Frankenstein. Classic monsters. Nocturnal Transmissions recommends them. Ooh, well, that turned into quite the lecture, didn't it? And I was really trying to keep it brief. Well, let's get to our story. I believe you've waited long enough. Our Halloween presentation this year takes the form of a poem. A poem recommended to us by our obviously terribly erudite Patreon subscriber, Phoebe Bryant. This mean little morsel of morbid verse comes to us from all the way back in the 19th century, courtesy of the esteemed English poet, Robert Browning. Lest we forget, gentle listener, both Dracula and Frankenstein were similarly birthed during the Victorian era. I think we're certainly looking for our horror thrills in the right place, are we not? So, without further ado, Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present our offering for Halloween 2020. Robert Browning's Porphyria's Lover. The rain set early into night. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened, with heart fit to break, when glided in Porphyria. Straight she shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up, and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hair, and let the damp hair fall. And last she sat down by my side, and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm about her waist, and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping made my cheek lie there, and spread o'er all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me, she too weak for all her heart's endeavour to set its struggling passion free, from pride and vainer ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew, while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do, and all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily oped her lids. Again laughed the blue eyes without a stain, and I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still. The smiling, rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I, its love, am gained instead. Porphyria's love. She guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred. And yet God has not said a word. Halloween, gentle listener. This episode was brought to you with the generous assistance of our cohorts, Evan Dooley, Thomas Arvin, Michael Wood, Sam Bell, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, and Donica Shelley Moody. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland. Until next time, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle